students, welcome back for another interesting session on tourism development in India. The topic is divided as areas of concern, tourism development at historical sites, tourism and ecology, constraints of tourism, domestic and international tourism. Let us start with the areas of concern. Tourism is the activities of persons travelling to and staying in places outside their usual environment for not more than one successive year for leisure, business and other purposes not related to the exercise of remunerated activity from within the place visited. Tourism is travel for recreational or leisure purpose. In general, tourists are the people who travel to and stay in places outside their usual environment for the purpose of leisure, recreation and enjoyment. Tourism in India has seen exponential growth in the recent years. India is one of the most preferred destinations for both overseas and domestic travellers. Tourism enables the international traveller to understand and experience India's culture diversity firsthand. According to official estimates, the Indian tourism industry has outperformed the global tourism industry in terms of growth in the volume of foreign tourists as well as in terms of revenue. For India, tourism to grow rapidly and significantly, we need to address some key areas of concern: infrastructure, promotion and marketing at domestic and international levels, skill development, tourism related education and professionalization of service and management, service providers skill enhancement and the addressing of general hygiene and sanitation concerns. An increased synergy among ministries for the benefit of tourism and simplification of the visa and tax structure needs to be looked into. Coming to tourism development at historical sites. While developing tourist resorts at historical sites and old villages, native inhabitants are generally distressed to find their narrow streets full with tourist traffic and their marketplace converted into car parks. Worst towns are those which are cluttered with souvenir stands and the bazaars packed with roadside dhabawalas and fast food centers. In India, damage to our monuments including Taj Mahal, Fatehpur Sikri temples in Gaya and Varanasi is becoming apparent due to the growth of national and international tourism. Thus, it is important to note that the exposure of our historical monuments and sites be carried out with utmost care in order to avoid the damage on account of the rapid growth of tourism. The NCT considers that all such damage is not accidental. Most of them is caused by petty vandalism of the new barbarians, the tourist crowds. They secretively chip away pieces of marble to take home as souvenirs. They also steal handicrafts from churches, scratch out mosaics from walls and floors, cut noses of statues. However, this kind of damage cannot be considered as ecological damage. This is damage to our sculpture and cultural heritage. Those assigned to look after our historic sites like the staff of the ASI are helpless. So, tourists continue to threaten our cultural heritage. The protection of our sculpture and cultural heritage is as important as the protection of our ecosystem. Tourism development in coastal and marine areas. The mass tourism development has also adversely affected the natural charm of coastal and marine areas. The degradation of coastal beaches takes place all along India's extensive coastline. Primary problem is the management of a coastline, which is under the pressure of tourism development. It arises from the fact that beach resources, unless wisely managed, are liable to get dissipated even to the point of extinction. In addition to beaches, other coastal ecosystems are also affected like mangrove forest, coral reefs and marine life. Mangrove forests are a product of a complex interplay of sea, attested land and river deposition. Mangroves also protect our coastline from erosion by the sea. These mangrove forests are denuded by tourist activities. Apart from it, coral reefs and marine lives are being destroyed by such activities. Tourism development in mountain areas. Growing incidence of landslides on hill roads is one of the major problems of the mountain areas. Landslide disasters in the Himalayan region has become endemic due to reckless construction and maintenance of roads to provide access to the hill stations. The regions of hill stations are ecologically fragile. Thus, road construction on these hills can create ecological havocs. Coming to tourism and ecology. In that we have tourism and urban ecology. Tourists are the temporary visitors. They visit cities and towns to see and experience the advanced urban amenities. Most of the hotels, especially star hotels, present a pleasing environment for the tourists. It is basically on account of tourism that the surrounding of such hotels present dream look. However, it is the joint responsibility of the central and state governments, the local bodies, voluntary organizations and the citizens to beautify the surroundings and the environment. Tourists would always be happy to visit these neat and clean places. Ecology and rural areas. Guided and controlled tourism would not have adverse impact on the ecology. Both domestic and foreign tourists may travel to villages for fresh air, clean water and fresh food apart from the beautiful surroundings of the city. In the most of developed countries, workers working in the cities move to the rural areas during holidays for getting a fresh lease of life. The concept of rural tourism and agri or agro-tourism has been developed in many countries. Rural tourism. Rural tourism or tourism in rural areas is a new form of activity that can bring economic and social benefits to the rural society. The basic concept of rural tourism is to benefit the local community through entrepreneurial opportunities, income generation, employment opportunities, conservation and development of rural arts and crafts, investment for infrastructure development and preservation of the environment and heritage. Rural tourism will bring people of different cultures, faiths, languages and lifestyles close to one another, and it will provide a broader outlook of life. It will not only generate employment for the people, but it can also develop social, cultural and educational values. The potential for rural tourism to be a major force in rural economic development resulting in poverty alleviation is yet to be realized to the fullest extent. The development of a strong platform around the concept of rural tourism is definitely useful for a country like India, where almost 74% of the population resides in its 7 million villages. Rural tourism is one of the few activities which can provide a solution to these problems. Besides, there are other factors which are shifting the trend towards rural tourism, like increasing levels of awareness, growing interest in heritage and culture, and improved accessibility and environmental consciousness. In the developed countries, this has resulted in a new style of tourism of visiting village settings to experience and live a relaxed, a healthy lifestyle. Rural tourism will emerge as an important instrument for sustainable human development, including poverty alleviation, employment generation, environmental regeneration and development of remote areas, advancement of women and other disadvantaged groups in the country, apart from promoting social integration and international understanding. It can help inflow to resources from urban to the rural economy. It can prevent migration of rural people to urban. Both short-term and long-term planning, implementing and monitoring are vital in avoiding damage to rural areas. Environmental management, local involvement, sound legislation, sustainable marketing and realistic planning are crucial for the development of rural tourism. The government should promote rural tourism to ensure sustainable economic development and positive social change. Island ecology and tourism. The island tourism has its own peculiarity and it gives a new direction in tourism promotion. Island means a landmass surrounded by water. India has two major groups of islands like Andaman and Nicobar islands and Lakshadweep island groups. The ecology and environment of these fragile islands should be given protection. The Ministry of Tourism, Government of India has to be the nodal agency for all tourism schemes or projects. Moreover, other ministries, departments and agencies have to accelerate clearance of projects and must provide sufficient funds for the schemes which fall under their purview. Wildlife ecology and tourism. Wildlife takes into account all flora and fauna available in the biosphere uninterrupted by tourism. In a narrow sense, wildlife includes any animal that lives in a free condition in an environment that provides a habitat. Such wildlife can be microscopic. It includes insects, spiders, reptiles, fish, amphibians, birds and mammals. Wildlife tourism must always be planned. India has more than 550 wildlife sanctuaries. While planning tourism projects, we must consider that comforts and pleasures to the tourist must not be arranged at the cost of nature and wildlife. As a matter of fact, wildlife tourism has contributed significantly to the foreign exchange earnings of a number of developing countries of Africa. For example, Kenya depends heavily on its wildlife tourism. Moving on to the constraints of tourism. Tourism by nature is international. Consequently, the industry is extremely sensitive to fluctuations in the international economy. At times, it is seen that the exchange rates of currency affects the potential prospects of the tourism industry itself. The fall off in travel by the US citizens following the devaluation of the dollar in the early 1970s can be example to quote. vulnerable to exogenous forces. Tourism businesses are especially vulnerable to exogenous forces. Political instability or terrorism will harm business in one country by diverting tourists to other destinations, in turn benefiting business in those nations that tourists visit. For example, though Jammu and Kashmir in India is considered to be the most beautiful state to attract foreign tourists in large numbers, it is said that lot of tourist inflow has drastically fallen due to the growing terrorism and unrest in the region. Disease, natural disasters, communal violence, unfavorable changes in the currency exchange, new tax rates, or alteration in border crossing formalities can quickly and dramatically alter the tourist visits. However, the tourist operators through their personal experience can cope with these problems. Their coping mechanism, however, can be improved if they have access to professional development courses, professional literature, or consultants. Lack of adequate infrastructural facilities. A major constraint in the growth of tourism in India is the lack of adequate infrastructural facilities, especially air transport. The first major step would be to increase the use of air transportation to facilitate movement of tourists within and outside the country. It is also hoped that the open sky policy will go a long way in increasing tourist traffic in India. Poor facilities. Poor and improperly designed facilities have also affected tourism. It is seen that 98% of tourist arrivals in India are by air. The Ministry of Civil Aviation and International Airports Authority must help to improve amenities at domestic and international terminals for better service. Large private investment has to be mobilized to achieve significant developments in tourism. The government has to play significant role to facilitate and also act path setters by putting up lead accommodation units, etc., apart from all necessary support services to initiate the process of development with a view to avoid over exploitation and achieving sustainable growth in tourism. Moving on to domestic and international tourism. The development of tourism infrastructure and the growth of international tourism in India are directly linked and even with domestic tourism too. It is because of the reliance in the growth of domestic tourism that India has been able to attain a certain growth rate in tourism supply side which totally caters to international tourism. Thus, the development of domestic tourism is considered as the base for development of international tourism in India. There are a few other aspects which provide the linkage between domestic and international tourism. They are: domestic tourism contributes to an improved balancing of the national economy through redistribution of national income and thus provides a better environment for the growth of international tourism. Domestic tourism provides and heightens the awareness of common interest and contributes to better understanding and tolerance for a tourist. This also contributes for understanding the needs of foreign tourists. It would be difficult to create exclusive infrastructural facilities for international tourists at the cost of other developmental activities for local population, as facilities so created would face the risk of underutilization and seasonality. Therefore, facilities are set up with a view to augment the domestic traffic and standards are maintained to attract the demand of international tourism in order to generate better turnover. One of the important features of domestic tourism is its ability to sustain and maintain the tourism industry during lean periods of international tourism by providing an alternative and demand substitution. Experience has shown that the domestic tourism in India is less sensitive to economic and political disturbances as compared to international tourists. This factor itself has contributed to the maintenance of tourism industry in India. The demands and expectations of domestic tourists are usually reasonable and do not call for heavier investment burdens on the tourism industry as compared to the demands of international tourism. The experience shows that tourism development of facilities for domestic tourism has always been at the initial stages. The international tourism is subsequently accelerated after establishing facilities properly. Coming to the conclusion, the terms tourism and travel are sometimes used interchangeably. In this context, travel has a similar definition to tourism, but implies a more purposeful journey. The terms tourism and tourist are sometimes used negatively to imply a shallow interest in the cultures or locations visited by tourists. More recently, creative tourism has gained popularity as a form of cultural tourism, drawing an active participation by travelers in the culture of the host communities they visit. The importance of tourism as an important instrument for economic development and employment generation, particularly in remote and backward areas, has now been well recognized all over the world. It is an important activity for cultural interaction and environment conservation. Thank you.